The first time I saw my mother-in-law's face turn completely colorless, she was standing in a crowd of 400 people while Georgia's governor announced my name over a microphone and awarded me a $47 million contract she'd spent 6 months trying to steal. Her hands were frozen halfway to clapping position. The winter morning smelled like fresh concrete and ambition. Behind me stood the 6-story building I'd designed, 240 units of affordable housing that bore my architectural signature on every line. The governor leaned into the microphone and said my name again, louder this time, praising the vision that Constance had told her son's supervisor was too risky, too inexperienced, too dangerous to fund. I watched her standing there in her navy suit, trapped between needing to applaud for appearances and physically unable to move. Her 14-year-old granddaughter stood beside her, phone raised high, filming everything. That's when I knew. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like destroying your enemy. Sometimes it looks like standing in the sun while they watch from the crowd, finally understanding what they tried to take was never theirs to steal. But let me start from the beginning, 3 months earlier, when I first realized someone close to me was sabotaging my career. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we begin, I'd love if you could drop a quick comment. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone in your own family? A simple yes or no is perfect. Quick note: this story includes some fictional elements added for storytelling and reflection. What truly matters is the lesson it carries. The governor's hand was warm when she shook mine that Friday morning in January. But 8 weeks earlier, I was sitting at a dinner table where no one would meet my eyes. At 37, I had spent 3 years designing homes for families who'd been priced out of Atlanta, and not once had my mother-in-law asked what I actually built. That December evening, Constance Whitfield sat at the head of her Buckhead dining table like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. 62 and recently widowed, she had spent her teaching career correcting other people's children, and retirement hadn't softened her need to correct mine and Hayes's choices. I just don't understand why you'd choose to design housing for people who can't afford better, Constance said, her voice cutting through dinner conversation. It reflects on the whole family. The table went quiet. 12 family members, silverware clicking against china, red wine glowing in crystal. Someone has to, I said. But why does it have to be you? She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. You have a degree from Georgia Tech. You could be designing something prestigious. Hayes Whitfield, my husband of 6 years and a 39-year-old software engineer, had perfected the art of looking at his phone whenever his mother criticized my work. He was doing it now, cutting methodically into his roast beef without looking up. I waited for him to say something. He didn't. Desmond Whitfield, Hayes's younger brother at 38, managed insurance claims during the day and gambling debts by night, though his mother blamed his divorce on bad luck rather than bad choices. He smirked into his wine glass. You know the moment you realize no one at a table of 12 people, not one, will defend you? That silence has a specific weight. Only Sloane met my eyes. Desmond's 14-year-old daughter sat at the far end, sketching in a journal she never let anyone read, her dark eyes holding something other than judgment. Something that might have been sympathy. I need some water, I said, standing. No one tried to stop me. Constance's kitchen smelled like roasted meat and expensive wine. I filled a glass at the sink, and that's when I saw it. Paperwork clipped to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a schoolhouse. I recognized the header: Eastside Commons Housing Assistance Application. My program. The one I'd spent 3 years designing. I stepped closer. Application number EC 2847. Applicant name: Whitfield, Constance R. Stated annual income: $18,000. Her actual retirement income was at least 4 times that. She was applying for assistance from the program she'd just called embarrassing, in front of everyone. I stood alone in that kitchen, cold water glass sweating in my hand, staring at the fraudulent application. For the first time that evening, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I finally understood exactly who I was dealing with. I drove home from that dinner with the image of Constance's fraudulent application burned into my memory. Hayes rode in silence beside me, and I let him. By the time Sunday morning arrived, I'd made a decision. Hayes poured his coffee without asking if I wanted any, and that small absence of habit told me everything before we'd spoken a word. The December sun filtered weakly through our Virginia Highland apartment windows. He stood at the counter with his back to me, shoulders tight, stirring sugar he didn't need. "Why didn't you say anything last night?" I asked. "Not one word." He kept stirring. "Mom gets like that sometimes. You know how she is." That's not an answer. He set down the spoon too carefully. "She just wanted to talk to you about your career. She worries the affordable housing thing isn't stable long term." "Talk to me." I kept my voice level. "She humiliated me in front of 12 people. I thought if I warned you beforehand, you'd come in defensive and it would make things worse." The coffee maker hissed in the silence that followed. "You knew," I said slowly. "You knew she planned this. She mentioned she wanted to have a conversation about. You sat there and let her humiliate me because you thought telling me the truth beforehand would be inconvenient for you. That's not fair." "Fair?" I stood, my chair scraping against the tile. "You're my husband. You were supposed to be on my side." "I am on your side," but he still wouldn't meet my eyes. There's a specific kind of betrayal that comes not from someone who hurts you, but from someone who watches you get hurt and does nothing. One is an enemy, the other is supposed to be on your side. "How long did you know?" I asked. "She called Thursday, said she wanted to talk to you about career stability. I didn't think." "3 days. You knew for 3 days, and said nothing." I was trying to keep the peace. "You kept your peace, not mine." I walked past him to the closet, pulled out my coat. The morning air would be cold, but I needed out of this apartment, away from his excuses. "Where are you going?" Hayes asked. "It's Sunday morning." "The office." "On Sunday?" "There's an envelope I need to open." He looked confused. "What envelope?" "One I received 3 weeks ago, and never had reason to look at closely." I picked up my keys. Until now. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked out the door while my husband stood in our kitchen with his coffee, finally understanding that some silences cost more than he'd calculated. That envelope had been sitting on my desk for weeks, unopened, unimportant. But last night had changed what I needed to know and what I needed to do with that knowledge. The Sunday morning drive to Midtown took 15 minutes through empty Atlanta streets. I parked in the underground garage and rode the elevator to the 7th floor, where our architecture firm occupied half the building. The office was silent, except for the hum of the HVAC system. The envelope sat exactly where I'd left it 3 weeks ago, beneath a stack of permit applications on my desk. In the empty Sunday silence, I could finally see what I'd been too busy to notice before. The return address read Office of the Governor, State of Georgia, official seal embossed in blue. I picked it up carefully, and that's when I noticed. The adhesive along the flap looked wrong, not torn, but disturbed. Someone had opened this envelope, read the contents, and carefully resealed it. My hands steadied as I slid my finger beneath the flap. Inside, a single sheet of letterhead and a formal document. "Dear Miss Mercer," the letter began. "Your innovative approach to affordable housing design has set a new standard for Georgia." I read faster. "We are pleased to announce the statewide expansion of the East Side Commons model. $47 million allocated through state and federal partnership. Lead architect, Margot Mercer." $47 million. Lead architect for the entire state program. I checked the postmark, 3 weeks ago. The dinner invitation from Constance had arrived 2 days after this letter. There's a specific cruelty in attacking someone not because you don't know they're succeeding, but precisely because you do. I was still holding the letter when the office door opened. Thane Garrison, a 34-year-old associate architect with sharp eyes and sharper suits, had been acting strangely ever since the dinner, asking too many questions, watching me work. Now he stood in the doorway looking as surprised to see me as I was to see him. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Didn't expect anyone here. Just need to grab some files real quick. Client meeting prep." He moved past me to my computer station before I could respond. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Project files. I left them in the shared drive." He was already logging in, fingers moving fast across the keyboard. "Won't take a minute." I watched him plug a thumb drive into the USB port and start copying folders, my folders, project documentation I'd spent months developing. "Those are my project folders you're copying," I said. "Yeah, shared resources for the presentation. I'll have them back to you tomorrow." He wouldn't meet my eyes. The progress bar filled. He ejected the drive, shoved it in his pocket, and headed for the door. "Thane," I called. He paused, hand on the doorframe. "What client meeting?" "The Henderson Project. Tomorrow morning." Still not looking at me. "Sorry to interrupt your Sunday." Then, he was gone. I stood alone in the fluorescent buzz of that empty office, holding proof that Constance had known about the $47 million contract for 3 weeks. Long enough to plan her attack. Long enough to open my mail. And now a colleague was copying my files on a Sunday morning with explanations that didn't hold water. The question wasn't whether she was trying to destroy my career. The question was, how many people were helping her? I spent the rest of Sunday compiling what I knew. By Monday morning, I had questions that needed answers. Paul Hendricks called at 8:47. The 56-year-old supervising partner who'd championed my community housing work for 3 years had never sounded this uncomfortable on the phone before. "Margot, do you have a minute?" I knew from the careful way he said my name that someone had gotten to him. "Of course," I said. "Someone called Saturday." He paused, wouldn't give a name, but asked detailed questions about your qualifications for the state contract. Said they were a concerned colleague. I set down my coffee carefully. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you had adequate experience managing projects at this scale. Whether the firm had properly vetted your capacity to handle state funding. It felt off." "What number did they call from?" "That's the thing. After we hung up, I checked caller ID. It felt strange enough that I wanted to document it." Another pause. "Residential landline. Buckhead area code." I looked up the address. "And?" "Margot, isn't that your husband's family?" I closed my eyes. "Yes. I wanted you to know, in case this is part of something larger." "Thank you, Paul." After we hung up, I sat in the morning light filtering through my office window. When does humiliation become sabotage? When does family criticism become professional assassination? I was watching the line disappear in real time. I opened my laptop and logged into the East Side Commons applicant database. My admin access gave me full search capabilities. I typed, Whitfield, Constance. One result. Application EC 2847. Filed November 4th, 2 weeks before the dinner invitation. Applicant name, Whitfield, Constance R. Date of birth matched. Stated annual income, $18,000. Her actual retirement income from teaching was over $75,000. I'd heard her mention it once, complaining about taxes. Residency address. An apartment in East Atlanta I'd never heard of, not the Buckhead house where she actually lived. This wasn't a mistake. This was welfare fraud, prosecutable, the kind that came with fines, potential jail time, and permanent records. I scrolled down. Emergency contact. Sloane Whitfield, granddaughter, age 14. I could end this today. Forward the application to the Fraud Investigation Unit. Report the lobbying call. Show Paul the tampered envelope. 3 pieces of evidence, each one damaging on its own, devastating together. But Sloane's name sat there on the screen. A 14-year-old who'd see her grandmother arrested, who'd watch her family implode, who'd done nothing wrong except be born into this mess. There had to be another way, one that didn't make me the villain in a child's story. I closed the database window and sat in the white noise of fluorescent office lighting. 3 pieces of evidence saved in a locked folder on my desktop: fraud documentation, Paul's call log, photos of the tampered envelope. I had everything I needed. I just had to decide whether I was the kind of person who'd use it and what that would cost the people who had nothing to do with this war. I spent Monday night staring at that evidence folder, unable to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. Tuesday afternoon, Thane Garrison closed my office door and said, "We need to talk about Saturday." And for 3 seconds, I was certain he was about to confess to helping Constance destroy me. "Sunday morning," I corrected. "My computer. You copied 6 project folders without explanation and left. I need to know whose side you're on." He sat down across from my desk. "Yours. I've been preparing your nomination for the National Community Architecture Award. Deadline is Friday." I needed comprehensive portfolio documentation. I should have asked, but I wanted it to be a surprise. I stared at him. "You're nominating me?" 3 years of affordable housing work. The East Side Commons model is exactly what the award recognizes: community impact, innovative design, sustainable funding. You deserve recognition beyond this firm. "Since when?" "Since October. I've been compiling materials for weeks." He pulled out his phone, showed me a draft submission form, my name at the top, project descriptions I'd written years ago, photos of completed units. The suspicion I'd carried since Sunday began dissolving. One ally. I had one ally. "Thank you," I said quietly. "There's something else." He set his phone on the desk. "I was here late Saturday transferring files. The office voicemail system plays through the desk speakers when you're logged in." I waited. "I heard your mother-in-law's call to Paul, all of it. The system recorded it automatically." Before I tell you what was on that recording, if you're still with me right now, comment A if you think I should use evidence immediately, or B if you'd wait. Add one short reason why. A quick note. Some details here are dramatized to convey the lesson about power and restraint. That's what matters. "You have a recording?" I asked. "Of Constance calling Paul?" 37 seconds. She gives her full name, questions your experience with large contracts, suggests the firm should replace you as lead architect. It's all there. He paused. "I can forward you the file, or we can delete it and pretend I never heard it. Your call." Sometimes the difference between winning and losing isn't the evidence you have, it's knowing who's holding the flashlight while you search for it in the dark. Thane pulled up the audio file manager on his phone. There it was. VM, Whitfield, C, 120,725, 847, MP3, 37 seconds. He turned the screen toward me. "I can email this to you right now," he said, "or I can delete it. But if you're going to fight back, you should know exactly what weapons you're holding." I looked at the file name. Time-stamped Saturday morning, 8:47. The same time Paul had mentioned in his call to me. "Email it," I said. He nodded and typed my address. A moment later, my phone buzzed with the incoming message. 4 pieces of evidence now. The tampered envelope, the fraudulent application, Paul's call log, and now audio proof of Constance's lobbying attempt, complete with her voice, identifying herself. I had everything I needed to destroy her. The question was whether I was the kind of person who would. That night, alone in my home office while Hayes slept in the next room, I laid 4 pieces of evidence across my desk like cards in a game where I'd already won. I just had to decide whether playing my hand immediately was the same thing as winning wisely. The tampered envelope with its altered postmark. The fraudulent permit application bearing Constance's forged recommendation. Paul's call log showing 12 conversations in 3 weeks. And now the audio recording, Constance's voice, smooth as silk as she lobbied for her son. 4 weapons, 1 target, infinite ways to destroy someone who'd spent months trying to destroy me. I could email everything to the licensing board tonight. By morning, Constance would be under investigation. By next week, her reputation would be rubble. By Christmas, the Whitfield name would be synonymous with fraud in architectural circles from here to Boston. Sloane's face appeared in my mind, not the teenager I'd met at the barbecue, but a 14-year-old girl watching her grandmother led away in handcuffs on the evening news. Watching her father try to explain why Aunt Margot, who'd once seemed so warm at a backyard cookout, had destroyed their family before the holiday season, I pushed the audio file away. My mother's voice came to me then, not a memory, but something deeper. A week before she died, when the cancer had taken everything but her clarity, she'd squeezed my hand and said, "You don't need to prove anything to people not worthy of hearing it, baby girl. The ones who matter already know your worth. The ones who don't will never believe it anyway." But what if they're hurting me? I'd asked, thinking then of a colleague who'd stolen credit for my design. Then you move. You don't stand still and trade blows. You step aside and let them swing at air until they're exhausted. And when they finally stop to catch their breath, you show them what you built while they were too busy swinging to notice. Revenge is a fire that burns two houses. But justice? Justice is standing in the ashes of your rebuilt home while your enemy watches from the street, finally understanding what they destroyed was never yours to begin with. I opened my desk calendar. November 27th. 8 weeks until January 24th, the dedication ceremony for the Garrison Medical Plaza, where 400 people would gather to celebrate what Constance had tried to steal from me, where Thane would stand at a microphone and thank the architect who designed his family's legacy, where reporters would photograph the building that bore my vision, my signature, my name, where Constance would have to stand in the crowd and watch me receive everything she'd tried to give her son. I gathered the evidence carefully, placed each piece in a folder, and locked it in my desk drawer. Then I pulled out my phone and typed a single note. January 24th, not 1 day sooner. 8 weeks to let Constance believe she'd gotten away with it. 8 weeks for her to relax, to think the danger had passed, to imagine her scheme had worked. 8 weeks until I showed her the difference between winning dirty and winning right. The countdown had begun. 8 weeks after I locked that evidence away, I stood on a wooden platform in front of 400 people while Georgia Governor Brian Caldwell adjusted the microphone and prepared to say my name to an audience that included my mother-in-law, 3 TV cameras, and the largest crowd I'd ever addressed in my life. The January morning was cloudless and cold. Behind me, the East Side Commons rose 6 stories, 240 units, wearing my architectural signature. Governor Brian Caldwell, Georgia's 53-year-old governor who'd built his reputation championing workforce housing initiatives, had personally requested to speak at this dedication. Now he leaned toward the microphone. "Margot Mercer's vision has created more than housing," he said. "She's designed a blueprint for how Georgia can serve its working families with dignity. Today, I'm announcing a $47 million statewide expansion, and I'm appointing Miss Mercer as lead architect for community housing across our state." The applause hit like a wave. 400 people, 3 cameras, and somewhere in that crowd, Constance Whitfield was hearing every word. Before stepping back, the governor leaned close, microphone off. "I heard someone tried interfering with your appointment," he said quietly. "You handled it correctly. Restraint shows more character than retaliation." My breath caught. He knew. The highest office in Georgia knew someone had tried to sabotage me, and he was validating my 8-week wait as strength, not weakness. When I stepped to the microphone, I kept my remarks brief, thanking the state, the community, the design team. I didn't mention obstacles or interference. I didn't need to. The ceremony was saying everything I'd never have to speak aloud. Winning doesn't always look like destroying your enemy. Sometimes it looks like standing in the sun while they watch from the crowd, finally understanding the difference between power they tried to steal and power that was never theirs to take. As applause filled the winter air again, I scanned the audience. Hayes stood in the 5th row, clapping slow and mechanical, staring at his shoes like a man at a funeral. Beside him, Sloane held her phone high, filming with a small, sharp smile. And between them, wearing a navy suit that suddenly looked too formal, Constance Whitfield stood frozen. Her hands were caught halfway to clapping position, as if the governor's words had turned her to stone. She wasn't looking at me or the building. She was staring at nothing, trapped in the mathematics of her own miscalculation. $47 million, lead architect, statewide expansion. Everything she'd tried to steal for Desmond, publicly awarded to the woman she'd tried to destroy. Sloane's camera stayed trained on her grandmother, documenting the exact moment Constance understood what patient revenge looked like. The 14-year-old caught my eye, and her smile widened, deliberate and knowing. I stepped down from the platform into handshakes and congratulations, but my eyes kept returning to that fifth row where Constance Whitfield stood frozen like a monument to her own miscalculation. The ceremony was over. The victory was public. But I wasn't done yet. There was one conversation left to have, and it wouldn't happen in front of cameras. Constance found me in the parking lot an hour after the ceremony ended. The crowd mostly dispersed, camera crews packed and gone. And for the first time since that December dinner, we stood face to face with no audience between us. I was unlocking my car when her voice came from behind me. "Margot." I turned. She looked smaller somehow, the navy suit wrinkled from standing too long. Her makeup settled into lines I hadn't noticed before. "I didn't know it was going to be this big," she said. "The ceremony, the governor, all of it. No apology, no acknowledgement of harm, just minimization, as if the problem was the scale of my success rather than her attempt to prevent it." I set my bag on the car hood, calm and deliberate. "You knew 3 weeks before the dinner. You opened my mail." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "The housing assistance application you filed," I continued quietly, "EC 2847, claiming $18,000 annual income. Did you think I wouldn't check my own program's database?" The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. "How long have you known?" she finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough." I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed copy of the fraudulent application already prepared, already waiting. "Withdraw it by Sunday. I printed this for you." "I haven't filed anything with the fraud investigation unit. Yet." I held the paper toward her. She stared at it like it might burn her fingers. "I could have sent this to the licensing board," I said. "To the State Ethics Commission, to every news outlet that covered today's ceremony. I had months to destroy you, Constance. I chose not to." She took the paper slowly, her hands shaking. "There's a difference between forgiveness and permission. Forgiveness is what you give yourself when you stop letting someone's cruelty define your worth. Permission is what they want when they realize you won without them, and that they don't get to have." "Sunday," I repeated. "Withdraw it, or I file everything Monday morning." Constance nodded once, turned, and walked toward her car without another word. I was loading my bag when footsteps approached again, lighter this time. Sloane stood a few feet away, phone still in her hand. "Aunt Margot?" she said quietly. "The video I took today, of the ceremony, of everything. Can I keep it? For myself?" I looked at the 14-year-old who'd documented her grandmother's public defeat, who'd chosen truth over family loyalty, who was learning what it meant to witness rather than hide. "Yes," I said. "Keep it." She nodded and walked back toward where Hayes was waiting. I sat in my car for several minutes after they left, keys in my lap, watching the East Side Commons buildings catch afternoon January light. My first instinct was to call Mom to tell her I'd done it, that the project was real, that her belief in me had been enough. Then I remembered. 4 years. She'd been gone 4 years. And somehow, the victory felt incomplete without her voice on the other end of that call I couldn't make. 1 week later, I'd find the letter she'd written, the one I'd been too afraid to open. 1 week after the ceremony, I finally opened the cardboard box I'd kept sealed in my closet since my mother's funeral 4 years ago, not because I'd forgotten it was there, but because I'd been too afraid to remember what was inside. The tape came away reluctantly, leaving sticky residue on my fingers. I sat on my home office floor, the box between my knees, breathing in the faint smell of old paper and dust. Architecture school photos, edges curled. My first foam core project model from sophomore year, crushed on one corner. A stack of greeting cards I'd sent her over the years, each one saved. And at the bottom, a manila envelope labeled in her handwriting, letters I never sent. I opened it slowly. 3 letters, handwritten on lined notebook paper, each addressed to a different professor from my graduate program. Dated from years ago before she got sick, when I was still figuring out what kind of architect I wanted to become. Dear Professor Steinberg, the first one read, I'm writing about my daughter Margot. You may not remember her from your housing policy seminar, but she remembers you. She tells me you said affordable housing was noble work that wouldn't make her rich. She chose it anyway. My throat tightened. She doesn't design houses for money. She designs because she believes good housing changes lives. I don't understand architecture. But I know my daughter is doing what's right, and I wanted you to know someone is proud of her for it. She'd never sent them. She'd written these letters and kept them, as if someday I'd need to know she'd been proud all along. I pressed the pages against my chest and let myself cry. Sometimes the validation you need most doesn't come from the people who doubted you finally admitting they were wrong. It comes from the people who believed in you before you'd proven anything, the ones whose voices echo longest because they loved you when you were still becoming. My phone buzzed on the desk, an email notification. Application, EC 2847. Applicant, Whitfield, Constance R. Status, voluntarily rescinded. Date, the 1st of February, 2026. She'd done it, without further threats, just done it. I set my phone down, still holding my mother's letters, and felt something clenched in my chest finally release. A knock at the office door, soft, hesitant. Margot? Hayes's voice came through the wood. Can I come in? I know it's late. But we should probably talk. About everything. I looked at the letters in my lap, my mother's words about doing right even when it's hard. Then I looked at the door, at my husband asking permission to enter his own home. Maybe that's exactly what he needed to do. The conversation we were about to have wouldn't fix everything. It wouldn't erase the months he'd stayed silent while his mother tried to destroy me. But it was a start, the first honest conversation we'd had since that night in November. I folded my mother's letters carefully and placed them back in the envelope. Come in, I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. 3 weeks after I let Hayes back into my office, and slowly, carefully, back into the parts of my life he'd forfeited through silence. I was sitting at my desk on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when Thane knocked twice and said the National Community Architecture Award Committee had sent their decision. He held a printed email like evidence. You're in, he said, grinning. One of 12 finalists nationwide. Ceremonies in May, Washington, D.C. The office went quiet for 3 seconds before colleagues started gathering at my door, applauding spontaneously. Recognition from professional peers, the validation that comes from the work itself rather than fighting for it. You actually pulled it off, I said to Thane. The nomination? No, he set the paper on my desk. You pulled it off 3 years ago when you started designing houses people could actually afford to live in. I just documented it. 3 months ago, this would have felt like victory. Now it felt like confirmation of something I already knew. My phone buzzed. A text from Sloan. Aunt Margot, my mom applied for the East Side Scholarship Fund for me, the one for families in the program. I got approved. College prep tutoring starts next month. Thank you for building something that actually helps people like us. I read it twice, then a third time. From Constance's fraudulent application, to Sloane's legitimate one, the program working exactly as intended for the next generation. The one who'd filmed everything and chosen truth over comfort. I stood and walked to the window. February dusk was settling over Midtown, and if I looked east, I could just make out the East Side Commons rooftops catching the last light. 240 families living there tonight. 240 households going to sleep under roofs I'd designed. Winning used to mean someone else losing. Now it meant 240 families going to sleep under roofs I'd designed, in neighborhoods they could afford, in homes that didn't require them to sacrifice dignity for stability. That was victory. The rest was just paperwork. My mother's voice came to me then, the letter she'd written to Professor Steinberg, the ones she'd kept for me to find. She doesn't design houses for money. She designs because good housing changes lives. She used to say, the best work isn't what you build with your hands, it's who you leave standing in a better place than where you found them. Sloane, Thane, the 240 families I'd never meet. Even Hayes, slowly learning what it meant to choose his wife over his mother's approval. I stood at that window watching February light fade, thinking about a 14-year-old girl who'd filmed her grandmother's humiliation and chosen documentation over loyalty. The best work you do isn't what you build. It's who you leave behind, standing in a better place, holding tools to build something even stronger. Mom knew that. And finally, so did I. And to you listening to my story, remember this. What people call a grandma revenge story doesn't always have to mean destruction. Looking back, I could have handled things differently. I could have exposed Constance the moment I discovered what she'd done, turned this into an explosive grandma revenge scenario. But I'm glad I didn't. The path I chose taught me something more valuable than immediate satisfaction. That patience and strategic restraint can be more powerful than any confrontation. Don't make my mistake of almost letting anger dictate your timeline. What I learned from this whole revenge story is that true victory isn't about making your enemy lose. It's about building something so strong that their sabotage becomes irrelevant. When you're faced with betrayal, especially from family, it's tempting to seek immediate payback. But sometimes the most powerful response is to focus on your own work, your own integrity, your own vision. I believe God's timing is always perfect, even when it feels too slow. Those 8 weeks of waiting taught me that patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. And when the moment finally arrived, it was worth every difficult day of restraint. If this revenge story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever dealt with family betrayal? How did you handle it? Please share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, justice, and unexpected outcomes, consider subscribing. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means the world that you listened to my journey. One final note. While this story is based on real experiences, certain details have been fictionalized for privacy and storytelling purposes.